Good morning, everybody. This is Carrie Getz, and welcome to another edition of our podcast series. Today, we're lucky enough to have Jen Snyder here, who is going to tell us a little bit about herself, and then we'll get started in talking about where she is in technology and how she got there. So, Jen, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Carrie. Thanks for having me. So, my name is Jen Snyder. I am the Chief Evangelist for a government technology solution provider. The name of our company is GovQA. And we've been providing technology solutions for probably almost 20 years. We focus mainly on the public records space. So we know a lot about freedom of information and, the requirements as far as each and every different jurisdiction and how they need to manage those processes. So our technology is very configurable to map to that.
Awesome. And that's something I think people don't realize that, as you throw things out there on the internet, first off, you really don't have a lot of privacy. You have to make that sort of an actionable thing to be private. And for young entrepreneurs starting out, or for younger companies starting out, there's a lot that goes into making sure that you as a company are doing the right thing for people's privacy. And this is kind of an area that we really haven't talked about on this podcast yet. But let's talk a little bit about kind of the public trade-off with privacy and convenience and where those where you need to pay attention to if you were starting out.
Absolutely. So, one of the interesting things I think that hits you pretty early on when you start looking at the public record space is that public records aren't always public. So even though they're government and, government owned documentation or evidence, whatever it might be, not all of it is ready for public consumption. So you have to realize that if you're going to be responsible for moving around this kind of data for an organization or a government entity, you have to understand what's private and what's not. There was a big buzzword a few years ago, transparency, transparency, transparency. Well, there's only so much that you can kind of stick up on a billboard and let everybody read. There's a lot of information that's still out there that people need to know how to request it, what is available to them, and how it's going to be delivered to them. You could have criminal justice information in there with victim information. You could have juvenile information. There's a lot or health information for that fact. This was a big year for that challenge. Now we're dealing with things like officer misconduct. Even though, yes, it's public information, not all of it is 100% public available or publicly consumable. So we have to make sure that we have given tools to someone who can safely transport that information, safely deliver it, track it, make sure it doesn't get in the wrong place at the wrong time or in the wrong hands. So that software has a big responsibility. It's just not somebody building an app today to help you go find the, national parks. There's a lot of risk involved in it.
Sure. And I think it speaks a lot. We talked to another security person not too long ago on this podcast, and she was talking about, kind of the trade-off between using facial recognition and privacy concerns around even just storing your face print. And, there's countries out there that do a lot of screen scraping off the internet, but even so, even just going on somebody's website, people don't really read the disclaimers or what people click and allow by accepting cookies or accepting other things. And that varies, like you said, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And I think one of the biggest ones that came up last year was California and how their data privacy laws are different than some of the other states in the United States. And some states go farther than others. And so just a good rule of practice, if somebody was looking to get into data security and sort of understanding all of this, we think of cybersecurity, which is more like keeping the hackers out, keeping your website safe, and keeping the ne'er-do-wellers at a good arm's length. But talk about, as a private citizen, some of the steps that you can take and some things that are important to realize, because nobody reads end user license agreements. And I read a study one time, and it was like this ridiculous amount, 18 years of your life could be spent literally reading and analyzing end user license agreements if you read them all, which...
Well, and I think they're designed just like some of our, instruction manuals. They really don't want you to read the whole thing.
Right.
They're just too big. They're too beefy, and they've got to cover a lot of ground. So they're just not really, your everyday light reading. So right. I can tell you that, one of the things you want to make sure as a private citizen, and I'll take this back to a quick story really quick. When we first started talking in the public record space, back in like 2007, 2006, some of the findings were, it's public. Public is public. It doesn't matter. We don't have to worry about the kind of technology we use. We're just going to stick a form up on our website. We're going to have it all moving around in email. And that has dramatically changed. So now what you're learning is that citizens want to know that there's a safe place they can make their requests. The media and research companies are also very, very heavily involved in the public record space. So they want an easy and secure way to do that. And I think just as government agencies, they are looking for all the responsibility and protection they can to make sure that that data doesn't get in the wrong hands. We hear every year there'll be some kind of horror story about how somebody, emailed, data files full of, student information or something of that nature. And those are all just really, really dangerous things, and they cannot get in the wrong hands. And you also don't want to get your hands slapped for it. So you as a citizen want to know that I'm going somewhere that's secure. I'm filling out something that seems secure. Call the agency that you're trying to speak with and ask them about their software. What we're also noticing as a trend, which will just help the public in general, is more and more of our state IT departments are writing new data protection laws or, statutes. So there's a lot that's going to go into legislation over the next year or so where you're going to see requirements. If you're using this kind of software, it has to have a minimum of X, Y, Z. If you're, all of those kind of things that really, they're not prevalent across the country today. There are some places leading the pack, but they're not as widespread as you would think. But with this last year and everyone having to pivot so quickly to a remote environment, we're seeing that trend just, explode.
And that brings up a really great point, because I don't think the remote trend is going away. I personally think that work from anywhere is going to be a huge benefit for a lot of companies. It's going to be listed on their perks page so that you can go to work for that company. You can travel in when you need to, but remote learning or remote work is going to be an option. And I think that's going to be very beneficial to a lot of companies and also to a lot of employees, maybe not so much the multi-tenant office building folks. But
I think office space is going to have a little bit of an issue, but I think it does two things. It gives you access as an individual, employee trying to retain work, to have a bigger pool to go from, right? But then in the same regard, me as as a company, I get to look at a talent pool that I was not reaching before because we just didn't function in that space. We didn't have a remote workforce that was as large as it is today. And so I think you're even seeing that now in the government space. So it'll be interesting to see in our government agencies, a lot of times there are residential requirements. They have to live within certain areas of their organization. I'll be curious to see if that change.
And it very well could, to be honest, that there's certainly the option for some of that to change pretty rapidly, both in the public and private sector. But that brings to bear these other questions about shadow IT and people circumventing IT organizations and people circumventing where things need to be kept. And, that was a big issue years ago with some of the online storage account that people were putting confidential company information in not necessarily confidential company sites. And I think that a lot of these company policies, as far as what can be accessed from where, are going to get significantly more stringent. And the problem with that is that it also makes there's extra steps involved to get there. There's extra, you got to change your password more often. You have to do all these things, which people find to be kind of problematic. And everybody knows somebody in the computer world that can help them circumvent that or try to circumvent that. So I really think that companies, government, states, municipalities, especially when we look at smart cities and some of the smart city projects that I've been working on, the amount of information that can be kept there is crazy. And it's not just what the city keeps about you, but there's in a lot of these areas, like for instance, smart metering, right? You can sign up on your own smart meter account. You can put leak detection on your on your house. You can have that tied to your account so they can automatically roll a truck and come shut you off if your water's leaking, for instance, which is great if you're on vacation, right? But there's certain amounts of information there that you wouldn't normally expect a government to have about you in your house, right? They now have access to your IP address. They have access to, if you don't secure your home network, that opens a big old can of worms.
Exactly. And I think, interesting, that goes back to the whole work from home thing. I think that what we saw trending really quickly, probably early June, was just the rewriting of policy. So, where things were kind of maybe haphazard in the past, some things were not digitized, some were, some things were accessible by everyone, some were not. And now I think you're seeing just a complete lockdown of that in a new 2021 policy when it comes to data management being written. And that's going to include how you manage data when you work remotely. So everything from, what can I access? And then just think about the speed in which they're now looking to digitize and looking to move all their server information into a cloud. And then what cloud is it? And, how do I arm all these people with all the right protections, and how do I monitor that on a regular basis? I mean, we as an individual company, when everyone went home in March, we immediately started down that path because we didn't have the large remote workforce that we have today. So it's interesting to see all of those things that were maybe priority 4 and 5 for some of these government agencies has now become like, plus one.
Sure. Plus 1, plus 2.
Exactly. I mean, I have stories of IT folks who are telling us that they were driving around on a weekend to buy everyone laptops and driving from store to store because, everybody was running out of everything and all their staff was never working remotely. So they never had laptops.
Right. Well, and to your point, though, it's one thing to drive around and get laptops, but it's another thing to secure that information. And we as a people are typically very trusting. We think that people are not going to do anything bad with our information and it's all going to be good and nobody's going to bother us and our information is safe. And that could not be farther from the truth. And the same thing with company, government, or any data information that's out there, whether it's your personal business or what's going on with your employer, public or private sector. And I think that we really have to examine tools that kind of do more than just keep honest people honest. They have to really make it difficult for people to get access to and disseminate information that they should not be.
Absolutely. So some of the things that I can tell you just from the evolution of our software. I mean, there's things in there now where, we can start to identify things like social security numbers and driver's license numbers, things of pattern, which shouldn't be put in places that it shouldn't go. So we're able to kind of flag it and identify, wait a minute. So you're going to see more and more of that stuff. Like, wait, why do you seem to be putting in a credit card number? This is not the time to do that. I cannot tell you how many stories I've heard of people who just get on one of those forms and just blast in every piece of personal information they have because they just want to be serviced. And it's like, well, you're trusting that someone on the other end is the person who should have that kind of information.
Right. Oh, sure. And all these phishing attempts. And I can't tell you, just from our Secretary of State here in Mississippi, we've had 2 or 3 different letters, I think, for organizations pretending to be legal entities of the Secretary of State's office. And they're not, they're just drumming up business, but they're doing it in a borderline ethical manner.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was working with a couple of different cities out on the East Coast who were hacked over the last few years. And one of them, it was pretty traumatic. Like they lost all of the billing information for their water department.
Oh.
All of it. So, I mean, that was just one little, nugget of the drama. But I mean, there's some scary things going on out there, but it's refreshing to see that, with what has happened this year, if any goodness comes out of it, it's just some more responsible policies and some awareness. There's been so many scams and so many, fraudulent activities that have come out of the pandemic that I think it's hopefully heightened everyone's awareness, to your point about not being so trusting.
Well, I think it heightens people's awareness that are sort of IT savvy or at least kind of used to those types of policies. But there's a whole sector of the population out there, the elderly, people that aren't very tech savvy, that are really sort of, starting out on this journey. And I think those are the people that are most vulnerable and need the most protection. We've heard time and time again about these ransomware attacks and how they go after the smaller cities, the smaller entities. And because, they're the most vulnerable, they don't really have the assets to do that. And I think some of these software programs and some of these cloud services are really amazing equalizers when it comes to the ability to protect what you have and protect that data. Because honestly, it's like radar guns and radar detectors. Nobody's going to be able to catch it all.
Right. Right. But you got to put up whatever you can. I mean, and that's just, for instance, using, let's use HIPAA data or CJIS data, which is our criminal justice information. When any of that kind of data is moving around now, I mean, there is a massive amount of risk in that. And so you have to be prepared not only to protect the citizen who's trying to get at this information, and maybe it's their own personal information, but it still has to move around. So you want to make sure that they feel comfortable, adding things in that might seem like a hassle to the public sometimes, like two-factor authentication and things of that, things like that. Might seem like a hassle, but I think the more and more we just keep educating the public, they'll realize that it's a necessary evil.
Oh, that's an extra step I'm always happy to take.
Right. Exactly. There's, things like that, changing your passwords, making your passwords bigger, all of those, don't have the passwords on the fridge. Those are all things that I think are just going to become more and more part of our daily life after this past year. Actually,
Absolutely.
Probably after the past 2 years, I would say.
Tell us, how did you get started down this whole path in security?
So, just really quickly. So I started out in sales back, way back in the early teenager days and never left. So I was, entrepreneurial when I was raising my children, and I ran my own daycare. And then I decided to take that because I really liked the entrepreneurial space, and I took that into real estate. So I was a realtor for multiple years. And then, as the market was starting to crash in 2007, 2008, I started to kind of think about, it's such a seasonal business. It has so much seasonality, and it's very ups and downy. And my kids were young, and I was, looking to be able to be at baseball games and sporting events and things of that nature. So I decided to kind of say, all right, well, if I can sell this and that, and, all the different things I've sold across my career, I absolutely can go into another field. So let's look at what makes most sense for us. And obviously for me, that was tech, because it was still ever growing. There was going to be new challenges coming out of it. Just to give you an example, when I got into the space, government websites, which was who my customer was, they were like one-page Yellow Pages ads. They were just electronic. You couldn't do anything on them except find a phone number and an address. So it's evolved so much, and I knew it was going to just be this constantly rapidly changing space, and not a lot of people go into the GovTech space. So it's a great place for you. If you are somebody who loves to sell by education, it's a great place to be. So it was a perfect fit for me. The company was still in a very young startup mode. So I still got that, to enjoy that entrepreneurial spirit. I got to watch a huge, a huge transformation in a company that started out in less than 10 people, and just really found the space fascinating. I found that everything I knew from the private sector was, a couple of years ahead of the public sector. So it gave you the opportunity to really kind of learn what the government was lacking when it came to technology, or what would be the ideal solution improvements that they would take. And you could see a journey. You could see that there would be a strategic plan of, we're going to improve this area of our organization, then this area. And it was all tech, tech centric. So it allowed us to come in and say, hey, I know what you're doing today, and here's how you're doing it, but look what you could do. And people just didn't know. They didn't know what they were capable of doing. They didn't know, the tools just weren't there. It's just not how government functioned. So it was a really fun space to be able to educate customers, learn from them, and evolve a product, based on that. And it's never changed. We're always in that kind of educational mode.
So when did you guys start out with this project?
So the company's been around since about 2000. And then we were, the majority of what we were doing in the beginning was we were focused on citizen engagement in general. So this could be anything from, there's a tree down in front of my house, I think I have a water main break, there's an abandoned vehicle, anything service related. Because what we realized was we had a product that was very service oriented. And who is the biggest provider of service? The government. So we started focusing there, and we, built out what was a very robust and leading, we call it a CRM, which is a citizen request management system in that space. And it was leading the charge for years and years. But then we realized that the product was so much more robust than how it was being used. And there was so much we could do with it from a security perspective, to help manage risk, all of those things that where we felt that there was more critical functions going on that would be a better use of our tools. So we started digging into the Freedom of Information Act, which was kind of getting, a whole lot of eyeballs on it at that time. And so we started to realize that, wow, there's a lot of complexity here. Every state has a different set of rules, has a different set of fees and exemptions. Everything that could possibly make it complicated was there. So it was a really great fit for a sophisticated product. So we started to go into that space and very quickly became the leaders in that space. We're still the leaders in that space. We've, got a huge customer base. So we're pretty excited about that. And we just keep learning and keep evolving. So, as we went into COVID and the pandemic, customers were coming to us for different needs and different, help with different things that are now new to them because they weren't dealing with them in the past. So it's really been a great place to stay in that entrepreneurial mode and be really agile, but yet still watch and assist a company grow to the level it's growing today.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back 20 years ago on government services that were available and what's available today. And it's a night and day difference. I mean, 20 years ago, you could not pay your water bill online. You couldn't pay your taxes online. You couldn't renew your car tag. You couldn't get a driver's license.
Mm-hmm.
Now think about that. All of that is seriously personal information, and it is all online. Yep. And if you're not careful about that data, a lot really goes into that. So I think it's really a cool service that you guys offer to be able to go in and kind of circumvent some of that and help some of these, especially the smaller municipalities that just don't have the headcount to do that, to be more secure in what they do.
Absolutely. And if you think about how it's even transformed more, we've got now, so many of our states using body cams. So you've got body cams, you've got dash cams. That's all footage that's public record. So now you've got now the public knows, hey, you have body cams because we're paying for them as citizens, and I want that footage. Well, a lot of times that footage is part of an active investigation. So you've got to give people tools to be able to communicate, and create the same positive sense of openness, yet in a safe way, because I can't just ship a video off to you. Then we've got all the states that are now moving toward new rules around officer misconduct. So that's going to send a whole nother level of sensitivity, to the space. So it's, the more people realize that information is theirs to get, it's just going to keep challenging how they manage that process.
Well, yeah. And on the other side of the equation, there's also a responsibility to use that information in entirety mm-hmm. and responsibly. And I think anybody that's watched the news over the last year can say that not all information has been used in its entirety or responsibly. And, there's a lot of cherry picking that goes on for good and bad. And it's a shame that everybody gets so stirred up. And then you hear a month later that something that was very exculpatory was intentionally left out.
I was just going to say that is a really great point because, information is unfortunately meant to be manipulated. So you sometimes don't get it in its entirety. It might have been delivered to you in its entirety, but you may not use it that way.
Exactly. Exactly. And no, I think that that's something that you talked about policies changing in government and even companies, how they deal with information and what they do with that information. But I think that there's just a huge, huge onus on people to do their homework and to figure out what to do with that information, especially if something comes from a Freedom of Information Act from the government, because there's stuff that's redacted and people can manipulate that, to your point. And it's very difficult to sort of weed out what you don't want to hear. It's like dealing with a kid that's in trouble. They're not going to give you the full story. You have to really do some sleuthing to make sure that it's the full story and see things from different points of view too. Like one person's body camera might have a completely different video footage than another person's, or than the dash cam or the public security cameras that are out there. And when we start building in smart city, to your point, it's just more and more information, right? So we have everything we have from smart metering and smart city services to traffic patterns and where people are and video cameras and surveillance and wireless access points. And then, where does that stop? Where those access points, because they're public access points, do they have to now, the city then, because tax dollars are paying for those, does the city now need to turn over usernames and passwords that you were used to access that? And so I think this is going to be one of these never ending, continuously evolving topics.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, as far as rewriting policy, when it comes to the Freedom of Information Act, you'll see so many states whose policy is 20 years old. So it's not even relevant to what could be being asked for now or could be delivered. It's just, they're just not there. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, I would say, back to that point we made earlier about all the services that have changed over 20 years. Can you imagine if you only got 20-year-old information and you had to act on that? I mean, it's completely irrelevant.
Absolutely. Right. Or there's information that's being, like some states who haven't written a new policy around body cams. When somebody asks for that footage, what are they doing? Now they have to consult attorneys because they don't know what to do with the information because their policy is, isn't written to relate to that. So it's an interesting, it's moving and it's moving fast.
Yeah, I've done quite a bit of work with cities that are doing the smart city implementations and putting in new data centers for that and figuring out all of this information and what to do with it. And honestly, there's a huge public safety factor here that you definitely lose some of your privacy to have public safety. So a really good example, years ago when they blew up the tube in London, mm-hmm. At that time, the average US citizen was photographed more in one day in the city of London than they are 2 years here in the United States.
Wow.
The upside of that is when they blew up the tube, they pretty immediately found the guy and raided his house and stopped another attack. And, the guy was arrested and taken care of. But, there's been a lot of pushback here in the US about privacy and these video cameras. And a lot of times when there's crimes in the US, they're going to private companies for their own security footage because they don't want the government to have that capability. So there's a definite crossover, I think, between public and private and the capabilities there. And when we start asking for footage and asking for stuff under the Freedom of Information Act, and if the police accessed data from private citizens, there's kind of a fuzzy line where that falls.
Yes, because that does happen. That happens all the time. So if if there's been an incident somewhere, they're going to go and they're going to canvass that whole area and figure out who, we've all seen a crime show. That really does happen. They're going and they're finding, all the little stores and neighborhood cameras that are out there and trying to see if that footage will assist them in their investigation. But now you've got a private citizen's video footage and now it's in your possession, which means it's now public record.
So if we had folks, that are listening to this podcast, since we are sort of career oriented and certainly vets coming back from service, I think, going into government IT and government security is a good avenue for them. Same thing with data centers and just IT in general, because it's all pretty procedural anyway. But if somebody were to sort of look at where they might find job openings from this, or, how to kind of get involved, maybe not getting hired on by their local city, but certain software or other things that support a city, where would you recommend that they go and start looking for these, and kind of where would you recommend they start networking and figuring out where these opportunities are?
Sure. So there is usually a website per state. Sometimes it drills down all the way down in the county, where it's going to list any kind of municipal type of employment. So that would be specifically to the government. And there's a wide range, especially even in the IT field. It's a great place to start a career too, I think, because you're not going to get into a fast-paced environment where everybody's very dog eat dog. You're going to get probably a good mentor. Someone's going to help you, kind of get started. It's a little less fast-paced than the private sector. But in the same regard, you also have the ability to look up vendors who are in the tech space. So there's no shortages of ways to use Google to search out, government tech companies. You'll get boatloads of them right off the bat. A lot of them have merged with others, so that there's like maybe 4 or 5 companies under one umbrella. So that makes it a little easier as well. I can tell you that tech companies right now are hiring in the government space, which is a great thing. And I think, as long as you take a look at LinkedIn and look up some of the LinkedIn groups, there's no shortage of groups that are in GovTech sales. So check those out. Or there's a lot of like meetups and things, or I don't want to use the word hackathon because it just seems like it's counterproductive.
Negative, yeah.
But there's tech groups that are very supportive of other companies that are selling into the GovTech space. Because at the end of the day, we all have to start to follow the same rules, right? There's requirements from the state on how we manage our data and how we do this, and it's just so I've seen there's a lot of really good supportive groups that are community based, if you will.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. And from an education perspective, I mean, of course, anything in IT travels public or private. It can kind of go either way. But are there certain recommendations or certain things that you think are more applicable on the government side from an education perspective? Or, where would you kind of figure that would be?
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, I think tech in general, I think you're probably going to be looking more at security, infrastructure, probably tech support in the beginning, kind of working your way up into someone who would be more on the strategic side of IT. Probably not as much heavy in the developer aspect. It seems like that's usually something that gets outsourced, and or just there's a vendor that's already doing that. Why would I build it in-house anymore? Kind of mentality. So I would go that route. I would definitely look, if you're somebody who's just trying to get into the space, search for internships. You might get lucky and find one where someone will let you in the door, and you may not have even finished your degree, or you're not even close to a degree. And you can, kind of grow up through the ranks.
Sure. I think internships are great. I've personally had a couple interns and would welcome a couple more. It never hurts, and it's a good way to build. But, I personally think they should be paid whenever possible, but not everybody does that.
Yeah, we do. We do that with our office, because I think sometimes if you find somebody who's really ambitious and is learning and wants to learn more and wants to grow, they could trump somebody with 5-10 years of experience.
Sure. Because they're hungry.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Well, Jen, I thoroughly want to thank you for your time. I'm going to ask you if you have any parting words that you want to leave folks, or any, recommendations that you have going out.
Sure, absolutely. Well, so for our private citizens, I would just say, be cautious of what information you're providing when you're looking for public information, because your information should be very protected by you. As far as the, folks in the government space who might be listening to this and interested in, improving that public records process, or any process that has risk and sensitivity to it, keep in mind that there's lots of ways to evaluate what should be in your software. senseless plug, on our website, there's an evaluation sheet that'll give you a lot of things that you should be looking for in software today to make sure privacy information is protected. Outside of that, I think, it's a great space to be in. GovTech is a great space. Tech in general is a great space. And it's only going to get fast and furious here for the next few years, I think.
Yeah, I think anything technical, anything medical, you can't go wrong with a degree in either one of those.
Agreed.
Or science in general, because that really is sort of the way of the world moving forward. And one more time, if you could give us your website for those people that are sitting in a car listening.
Sure, absolutely. Can I add one more thing, Carrie?
Sure.
So one of the other career ideas, when it comes to tech, is also think about, maybe you're not somebody who really wants to be fully embraced in the tech itself, but people still have to implement the tech. People have to be project managers in tech. They also have to be technical writers to write user guides and things of that nature. So there's a lot of avenues in the tech space that doesn't always necessarily mean I know how to code.
Absolutely. Coding is only one itty bitty piece. We say that a lot on this podcast. And I think that is a big misnomer in tech, is that you have to write code, and there's a million things that have nothing to do with code: operations, construction, you name it, even trades. And we focus on a lot of those too. So definitely a good point. So give us your website.
Sure, absolutely. It is GovQA.com.
There you
and
go.
On the website, Carrie, you can scroll down and you can find me in the resources section. If you wanted to reach out to me directly, all my contact info is there, or there's just some generic ways to reach out to us as an organization as well.
Cool. And absolutely look up the privacy guide. I think everybody should do that just to know what should be out there. I mean, one of the hard parts with just keeping up with the legislation and all of the rules around privacy is the time that it takes to do that. So anytime there's a tool out there that's available in a shortcut, I always recommend people reach out and check it out. It's always a good starting point anyway.
I agree.
Absolutely. Well, Jen, thank you so much for your time. For everybody listening, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to hosting you on another edition of our podcast series. Thanks, and have a great day.